Professor Lawrence Cram, as I said, is Acting Vice-Chancellor of the ANU at the moment. He is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor and has broad research and education responsibilities. His career spans more than 30 years of research and teaching in engineering, mathematics, astronomy, physics and computing. And prior to taking up his position here at the ANU, Professor Cram was Professor of Physics, Astrophysics at the University of Sydney. He was appointed to chair this from 1987 from the position of Assistant Chief of the CSIRO Division of Applied Physics. He's been employed as an astronomer in several institutions in the US, Germany and France. I think we're extremely lucky to have him here at the ANU, here in Canberra and in Australia. Please welcome Professor Cram.
I'm absolutely delighted to be here today, and I don't think it matters much to Australia that I'm here, but I must say that the politicians that we have at present, such as Kate, are just so refreshingly exciting and different. And thank you very much for everything that you've done to make today possible, and all the other things that you do in the ACT as well to help the people who are interested in the things that you believe in. So, quite wonderful. I've been asked to launch the event today and to deliver a keynote address, and I know that I'll forget to launch it if I don't do that now. So the event's launched. Congratulations to all concerned, and I wish you all the very best for today's conference and the discussions that take place today, but also it's clear that the technology will induce this conference to continue for at least the next couple of weeks. But of course, the discussion about openness is just on the rise, and this will be another contribution to a discussion that will continue, I suspect, for the rest of my days. I thought it might be helpful if I talked about three things that ANU is doing at present before I just make some general observations about the foundations of openness. My perspective is not quite as narrow as IT or IT-based technologies, and if I hope you'll forgive me for talking a little bit beyond those issues. The three things I'd like to talk about are the FASTS workshop that was held a couple of weeks ago about academic freedom. I'd like to talk about some work that we're doing in the ANU Research Committee about how we can assist ANU researchers and educators to put their materials into the open commons. And finally, I'd like to talk about, and I need to be aware of the fact that I'm being broadcast in due course, about some things that have arisen in a recent negotiation between the ANU and an industry partner that I think bear directly on some of the issues that have to do with openness and the opposite thereof. The FAST workshop on academic freedom was prompted by, Senator Conroy is the Minister for Everything Digital, by the Minister for Everything Innovative, Senator Carr, who said and has said a number of times that researchers who are funded by the public have an obligation, he uses the word obligation, to talk to the public about the research discoveries and the implications of that research in the areas in which they're experts. Now, traditionally, academic freedom has actually been about the conditions of employment of academics. It's about tenure. It's about the right of a person to be able to speak out and not suffer the consequences from their employer. In Australia, those dimensions of academic freedom, we hope, are normally dealt with in the industrial relations sphere through our enterprise agreements, and they don't bear very much on academic freedoms in Australia. It's more in Australia the right of academics to talk about things that prove to be objectionable to some parts of the society, and the obligations that universities take on themselves to protect those experts in their area of expertise when they're having those discussions. I think it's a very exciting proposition for Minister Carr to put forward, that we as academics have obligations to communicate our findings and the implications of our findings. It's something that ANU's researchers have been known for doing. We're quite accessible to the media, for example, but we can always do more of that. And recognising the importance of that particular part of academic life, our council has recently I guess, approved a statement. It's not so much a policy as a statement which says that when our academics are speaking in public and they speak in areas that are their expertise, they can expect the university to back them up if they come under attack. And unfortunately, that happens more than you might think and more than you might like. And our academics at least now know that they can count on the backing of the Vice-Chancellor and the executive of the university if they find themselves in that position. I think that agenda will actually go further. We know that under the old research quality framework, there was quite a lot of attention being paid by the former government to the impact of research that was funded by the public. Now, we're going to deal with that in a different way under the present government, but I think that Minister Carr is thinking that maybe the impact agendas of the research quality framework will be better played out in terms of open communication of our research discoveries. And I think that's a very positive and desirable way to address some of the issues that relate to the impact of publicly funded research. The second matter that I'd like to just raise is work that we're doing in the ANU Research Committee at present. Recognising the decisions that have been made in the EU, in universities like Harvard, Berlin Declaration, and the declarations that have been made by the Group of Eight, the university is now deeply engaged in developing the fabric which will allow us to publish our work in the open commons. That's a very difficult task for a university to conduct, and many of you would probably be quite frustrated to see the difficulty that the university administration appears to have with what looks like a really simple thing. But we don't know how to do this in a way that protects the university completely from all of the issues that have to do with intellectual property, copyright, those sorts of things. We will, in fact, complete this task by the end of the year, and we'll succeed in a kind of a best practice way, and it will be an excellent outcome for our researchers and I'm sure for the community. I think the way that we're thinking about it is interesting to reflect on. There's a technology layer that we've already got control of, the repositories and the interfaces that people can access our work through are now available and in many respects turned on. We've got a policy layer that has to do with the management of copyright, the interactions that we have with publishers. Academics write papers and quite often give to the publisher of their paper the copyright, and then our library has to go back and pay for the right to use materials that we've copyrighted. Okay, so that seemed like a pretty dumb thing. So then you have these journals where in fact there's no publisher involved, and then all the researchers come to me and say, but the managers of these online journals want you to pay $5,000 so they can referee my paper and publish it. So it does cost, and the cost gets transferred around. And I think what we object to is not so much meeting the costs, but meeting the excessive profitability of certain modes of managing and controlling intellectual property. And then finally there's the user layers, and they're really quite interesting. Just to show the kinds of things that we have to worry about. Suppose that we conduct medical research, and our medical researchers publish a paper that's quite erudite about a treatment for diabetes. And suppose that then is on the web, and it's uninterpreted. People will access that. The writers of the article never intended it to be addressed by people who worried about diabetes, and it's not therefore interpreted in a way that's helpful to them. It would be wrong, I think, to withhold the information, but it also has elements of wrongness to not interpret it as well. And the interpretation is something that we don't think of doing at present. If you publish a medical paper in a medical journal, you've got a pretty good idea about most of the audience, and you don't need to interpret it. So we are thinking about what it would mean to interpret the portal through which the community accesses our online information. I think it'll be something like a quality endorsement plus some kind of caveat. We already have online ANU ePress, which is a high-end, very high-quality journal-like interface. We don't want to put material that we would regard as op-ed pieces from our academics through that refereeing process, but we want to make them available. So we think the portal has to distinguish between the refereed high-quality publications that are really monographs from the op-ed pieces, which should be seen for what they are, op-ed pieces. And in that way, we can distinguish, for example, between an erudite medical article about diabetes and warn people this is not to be read as a simple piece of work, through to an op-ed that might be about that article, where the popular interpretation and the implications could be read through. But we think we'll probably have to provide more support than just that. And I guess I'm thinking of almost a business model for the access framework for ANU that involves overt interpretive activities at that level, which is definitely not the same as a media office. And it's something that I think very few universities have confronted yet. Finally, before I make some general observations, I'd like to just allude to a war story that arises in a commercial agreement negotiation. I should say that this is not a specific one. It's made up from several things that have happened to me in the last couple of weeks. We have a partner who has decided during the course of a research relationship to protect the ANU IP that they're acquiring by trade secret. We didn't write the agreement to prevent that happening, and the consequence of that is that our researchers can no longer talk anywhere at all about the research that's being deposited in that company. That is a disaster. Universities are not meant to be places where intellectual property is created and then sequestered. The existence of patents is designed to actually allow us to give an industry partner a monopoly position in respect of intellectual property, but also to allow the world to know about what they know so that that can be improved. Trade secrets are perfectly legitimate commercial vehicles, but they don't work between an industry partner and a university, and it's proved to be very difficult for us to deal with that particular situation. We recently signed up to a North American document called the 9 Principles for Good Technology Transfer, and if you read those 9 principles, if you Google 9 principles, you'll find it, or Google AUTM, AUTM, the American Union of Technology Managers. And those principles are all about the openness that should exist around intellectual property created in universities. Not just the patentable kind of intellectual property, but educational materials and copyright materials as well. And they're principles that were very easy for ANU to sign up to. I think we're probably still the only Australian university that's done that so far. But thinking about these things have made me very aware of some differences that you would know about. Open source, I think, open technology in the IT industry does work in large measure because the intellectual protections are provided through copyright. If you tried to conceive of what an open technology is where the intellectual protections are provided through patents, I don't think they work quite so easily. And I don't know that the advocates of open technology outside of IT have actually confronted some of the difficulties that have to do with attempting to use what's been so successful in the open source movement for, say, open biotechnology. Open biotechnology is very expensive for a university to engage in because we do need to protect the intellectual property before we let the open licenses, and I don't know how to do that. Richard Jefferson from Cambia is an expert in those matters, and if you wanted to move the openness agenda in those directions, we have in Canberra a world expert on those topics. But they're really very interesting to reflect on. I'd like to just conclude by being a bit academic, I suppose. The foundations of openness, of course, lie in what we understand about the commons, going back for centuries. Issues such as the tragedy of the commons, the reasons for enclosure, the nature of rent-seeking, have all played out for centuries in respect of the use of land in our society, particularly through common law and such things in English law. And they pervade somebody who learned their history when I went to school. I hope that's not what people learn at history now, but I know an awful lot about the commons. Throughout history, and I've just been reading about the 100 Years' War, so I'm sort of thinking quite a long time ago. Throughout history, the government, for very obvious reasons, has been deeply involved in the governance of the commons. Indeed, the 100 Years' War was funded by the taxes they raised off the peasants who were operating the commons. And that was why the enclosure movement, one of the main reasons for the enclosure movement, because the government completely destroyed the capacity of the peasants to operate the commons effectively, because they took rents that were far in excess of what the peasants could afford, and they destroyed the commons at the time. There are other reasons as well. So governments correctly and properly involve themselves in the management, the governance of the commons. With hindsight, historians find that usually the governments have not been benign. The contribution they've made has involved flaws. And it's highly likely that even the most favourably inclined government policies at the present time have embedded in them things that will come to be seen as flaws and difficulties. I'm pretty sure that the way that the international governments manage patents is really very far from where we really should be managing patents. In terms of open source and how that works, it feels to me like we're probably a lot closer to something that's about right. But of course, without the benefits of hindsight, you don't know. So I'd just like to make a suggestion that we need to be very careful and very thoughtful and very astute in looking at inadvertent consequences when the government goes about creating the governance frameworks for the openness agendas that we all support. And it's going to be very interesting to see how the 2020 summit, which is just the start of a particular kind of discussion, plays out in those respects. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. I think everyone is starting to get a sense of the magnitude of the agenda and how institutions like the Australian National University and how they insert themselves into this public policy debate become so critical. We've got a little bit of time, and we do want this to be an interactive discussion. Has anyone got a point they'd like to make, or even fire a question to us? I'm sure you won't mind.
I'm a public servant, so I understand the realities that the universities also operate under, because they're all bureaucracies at the end of the day. But a key issue about that, it seems to me, is the conditions that are attaching to a lot of the funding regimes, whether it be the NHMRC or the ARC or whatever. So we talked about academic freedom before, and that's the rights which are highly laudable. But we've got Minister Carr is advocating that sort of openness, which I fully endorse. But academics and public servants and others, there are a lot of constraints in the background there that are an integral part of the system. So in any development of public policy, we need to think about how that all works out as well, because it's a question of what level of discussion. I fully understand that, like what elements are even potentially patentable. Some matters are not patentable. As an IP lawyer, I understand that the challenge is there. So it becomes a question of how you strike the balance of disclosure against protection, and then if you do take out patents, and sometimes even like someone like Sun can take out patents and then really use the patents to, in effect, create an open space. They take out the patent because then they have the monopoly, and then essentially they give a free global license. So that's sort of turning the model on its head. I mean, patents can be used, quote, as a powerful tool for open for a commons creation, but it's not the norm. But let's be very clear about that. So all I'm saying is a whole lot of competing interests here. One of the key considerations that I come across as a lawyer in this IP area is that very often you've got to go back to the source of the funding, because some of the really fundamental and primary conditions about what you can do with IP, indeed what you have to do with IP, and who's going to own it, and what rights can be conferred, are determined at the very outset. So if government's going to get into this space of advocating that, it's a really fundamental level across all their funding programs. Not one, all of them. That's what I'd like to say.
Comment on that. The ARC, on the statement there, the ARC and HMRC do actually have an open access policy, and making their bid to appeal in 3 years' time from the current research grant into an open access repository. So I think we need to look at those sort of issues. And the Productivity Commission in their science and innovation report said that basically 98% of Australian research is quote uncommercial to a certain extent. So let's make that publicly available and public knowledge.
Yeah. Can I just ask people to say who they are and when they fit in?
Sorry, I'm a And I people work from the Crown Law Office in the Justice and Attorney General's Department in Queensland. I'm presently on secondment to Queensland Treasury, and I'm working on a whole of government public sector information online licensing project for Queensland Treasury at the moment. And I'm working very closely with the CC movement. We're in fact exploring the application of Creative Commons licenses to public sector information, and we're quite advanced into the Treasury. But and there's an international movement sort of stirring here, so that's what I'm thinking.
And we've got a Creative Commons presentation later. Sorry.
And it was just to finish off that
Yeah.
Peter Shergold, with the public policy thing at ANU last year, said he published a book with the University of Pittsburgh Press that sold 2,000 copies in 20 years, which is actually quite a good sale price. And he put something in John Waller's public policy area, and that had 3,000 PDF downloads in 3 months. He said that could be a sort of government policy, and he probably now got something else. And the last thing is basically, when we're talking about text, it's the actual university academics, as Lawrence indicated, who actually give away their copyright to the multinational publishers who are actually making billions of dollars in profit from academic research. And so what we need is to use the Creative Commons and other issues in an academic context, which I think is the major issue that we face at ANU.
Thank you very much.
Science Commons.
Yeah.
Yes, Andrew Critchell from the Sample team. I agree that intellectual property concerns are absolutely key to the future of sort of open computing, particularly the area that I'm interested in is open source and free software. To me, the key issue that needs to be solved is the problem of independent invention, because the patent system does not cope with the reality of our academic and non-academic system, where an idea comes about, an idea whose time has come, appears, multiple people invent it. The norm in the IT industry is for independent invention, but the patent system considers that essentially to be a crime. It considers it what is a fundamental aspect of our intellectual work, which is to think of ideas. Thinking becomes a crime under the current patent system. And I think if we can't solve that problem, if we can't make independent invention something that is encouraged rather than punished, then I just don't think we're going to get anywhere. And I think we're going to have that ticking time bomb of the patent system, which is going to really destroy the future of openness in IT.
Roger Clark, visiting professor here and at UNSW in Unlocking IP. One of the things we've had to do in open content and open source is to bend and twist copyright law as it is writ in order to make it serve the need. We're looking at the same problem with patent law. And one of the big elephants in the room that we've got to not ignore is the politics of patent and copyright law. We're locked in by the US Free Trade Agreement in relation to a range of things affecting copyright. And that has been twisted and warped in the last 20 years, strongly in favour of copyright owners and against copyright users. Now, achieving balance and achieving 21st century flexibility and balance between proprietary, I'm also a consultant by the way, so I'm very much private sector, the balance between the proprietary and the open is something that we have got to correctly indicate.
Sounds like we're all kind of on the same page in this area. Has anyone got a particular counter view they want to pitch up? Otherwise we're going to go up to Lawrence.